All right, but now everywhere you turn, China is in the news. And, of course, Hong Kong is a flashpoint. At the weekend, the demonstrations turned violent for the first time. The protests were originally, as you know, about a plan by the Hong Kong government to introduce a law that would have allowed Hong Kong citizens to be extradited to mainland China to face the legal system there. Everyone knows that the Chinese legal system is no good, a conviction rate of more than 99%. Hong Kong's often rated as the most economically free jurisdiction in the world, but it still sits as a sovereign territory of the biggest socialist nation in the world, ruled by the biggest communist party in the world. Since Beijing took charge in 1997, many of these freedoms have been whittled away. In so many ways, the people of Hong Kong are really heroes of democracy. President Xi of China has taken China back 50 years, a one-man dictatorship with soaring power ambitions. The impetus for liberal reform is gone. President Trump may hold a key here. He's had some victories on the trade issue, but Trump will never be given credit. But by jacking up tariffs on Chinese imports into America, foreign investment and manufacturing are moving to places other than China. China's feeling the pinch. Whether President Trump says, if you want tariffs to be relaxed, back off on Hong Kong, that's most probably another issue. But here we are in Australia educating the sons and daughters of China. Our international student market is worth $35 billion. Chinese students provide about 40% of that, 14 to 20 billion. Australians, hearing China's aggression in the news every other day, say, why are we educating so many overseas students instead of our own kids? Why are we selling so much of our education and teaching to others who'll compete against our kids in the future? As one correspondent said to me, sleep on, lucky country. One Australian university received almost $1 billion in international student fees last year. 8 received more than 30% of their revenue from overseas universities. 3 of the so-called elite group of 8 universities, the University of Sydney, the University of New South Wales and Monash University, earned more than $1 in every $3 from international students last year. Indeed, the University of Newcastle Vice-Chancellor Alex Zielinski said recently that overseas students were used to balance the books. About 400,000 foreign students, a third of them from China, were enrolled in Australian universities last year. International students now make up 25% of Australia's university enrolments. Who are these people? Where are they from? Recently, we've seen clashes on our university campuses between pro-democracy and pro-communist students in the wake of these mass protests in Hong Kong over China's encroachment there. Recently, 4 federal Liberal MPs expressed concern over the level of influence the Chinese Communist Party holds over universities in Australia. The Queensland Senator Amanda Stoker, the Sydney MP Dave Sharma and Victorians Tim Wilson and James Patterson warned university heads not only about the need to protect free speech, but also about the need to protect national security. The very bright Senator Amanda Stoker said, quote, there is a reluctance in their administrations to defend the rights of non-CCP, Communist Party, aligned students who dare to speak out against Beijing. She said it is legitimate to ask questions about how China came to have so much influence in these institutions. Mr Sharma, the gifted and recently elected Liberal member for the Sydney federal seat of Wentworth, said he was concerned, quote, some universities have become a little too dependent on foreign university students as a source of revenue and may be favouring short-term financial interests over long-term national security concerns. Well, let's face it, as I've said, Chinese students account for 40% of Australia's $35 billion international student market. Earlier this month, we learned how Chinese authorities approached the family of an international student who'd taken part in a university protest, warning his parents back in China of the potential consequences of political dissent. Well, it's in this climate that a new report has been released by the Centre for Independent Studies. It's called The China Student Boom and the Risk It Poses to Australian Universities. The report looks at 7 Australian universities which have what are described as, quote, high levels exposure to the Chinese market. The universities of Melbourne, ANU, Sydney, New South Wales, UTS, Adelaide and Queensland. The report's author is the Associate Professor Salvatore Babones. He's an adjunct scholar at the Centre for Independent Studies. He says these 7 universities have higher proportions of Chinese and international students than any university in the whole of the United States. He says around 10% of all students attending our universities come from China, with Chinese students accounting for more than 40% of all international students. And the sums of money involved are huge. This report has found that the University of Sydney alone generates more than $500 million in annual revenue from Chinese student fees. Before we go to Associate Professor Salvatore Babones, just let me ask you to digest these rather staggering figures. As I said, international students are roughly 25% of all students on Australian university campuses, but per 100,000 student population, American universities have 304 international students per 100,000, 304. Italy, 156. UK, 653. Australia, per 100,000 students, 1,559. 25% of all students on Australian university campuses are foreign. 10% are from China. Should we be concerned about what's happening as a result of these people being plonked into university campuses? One thing's for sure, I'll bet they're not being taught the virtues of Western civilization. Professor Salvatore Babones is with us. Good evening. Thank you for your time. How did you put all this information together?
Oh, thank you for having me on the program. But it's even worse than you realize, because I think the figures are so shocking, you couldn't read them properly. There are 1,500 foreign students in Australia per 100,000 population, not per students, per population. 1.5% of the entire population of Australia tonight is international students. That's extraordinary.
You say China has consistently been the world's largest source of international students over the last 20 years, with numbers increasing six-fold. Right. Why are so many Chinese students wanting to study overseas when there's plenty of universities in China?
Oh, well, three reasons. I mean, first, they want to migrate. That's the number one thing. The second thing is they want a better opportunity for the job market in China. An Australian degree is still a premium over a Chinese degree. And finally, they want sunshine. I mean, I had one student in my class from PRC China who told me he had never seen a blue sky until he came to Sydney.
Okay, all right. But there are plenty of universities all over the world. So why do they come to Australia?
Oh, they come to Australia because our standards are lower. If you want to go to the United States, you have to take the SAT, the Scholastic Aptitude Test.
That's a great answer. Say that again. They come here because what?
Because the standards are lower. Look, you have to take the SAT and get in the United States. And if you don't test well as a Chinese student, you come here. For a direct comparison, I only have one direct comparison. University of Sydney is the first university in Australia to accept the Gaokao, the Chinese exam, for admission directly to the University of Sydney. We require a score, minimum score, 70%. At the University of Birmingham in the UK, they're the first UK university to accept the Gaokao. The minimum is 80%. Now, 80% at Sydney will get you into the prestigious Daly L Scholars Program, which means just barely getting in at a UK university makes you one of the top scholars in Australia if you're a Chinese student.
But given the reliance on income, this is only going to get worse rather than better, isn't it?
Well, it's going to get worse when we move to India. I mean, right now, Chinese student numbers have plateaued. There are no more Chinese students who can afford to go overseas who aren't there already. But the India market is the next gold mine for Australian universities. The problem is Indians are not rich enough and not well educated enough to take up these places. By my estimate, there are only 3 million families in all of India who can afford an international education versus 24 million in China. The numbers aren't there, but we're looking for them anyway.
But see, Peter, you and I have talked about this before. Now, surely to God, he who pays the piper calls the tune. If a university sees that all this money is coming from foreign students, they'd be disinclined to fail them, wouldn't they? And cut off the supply of money.
Yeah, well, Salvatore will correct me if I'm wrong here, but there has been an explosion in group assignments.
Absolutely.
Most courses, and that's because they'll put a white Anglo kid in amongst a class full of foreign students or a group of foreign students, knowing that that one English schooled student is going to help lift everybody else.
Well, he does the assignment, and they all get the mark.
Correct.
Well, I've done that in my own classes to try to put one Chinese student in amongst a group of Anglo students to help them learn English and help them acclimate. But I teach sociology. I have a friend
at university and they can't speak English.
Oh, no. I have a friend in economics who has a class of over 100 students without a single Australian student in it. So don't talk about the groups with one Anglo. There are no Anglo students in the entire class.
Can they speak English?
They can speak English, but not very well, and that's really the issue. We have alternative pathway programs that advertise explicitly, if you can't pass the YELTS exam, that's the International English Language Exam, come to our pathway program, spend a year, spend the money, and we'll let you in without retaking the YELTS.
You're saying in the book that we should be concerned that our universities are taking a multi-billion-dollar gamble with taxpayers' funds.
Well, it's heads we win, tails we win for the vice-chancellors. If all of this pays out, they make their enormous multi-million-dollar salaries, and they look great. But if the Chinese economy collapses with our trade war going on right now, then the Chinese numbers are sucked out, and who has to pick up the bill? The taxpayers will have to pick up the bill.
My concern is fiscal, yes, I agree with you on that point. But two things concern me. One is that we are basically selling visa outcomes in a way that no other country does with this pathway. Once you get a degree from an Australian university, you're on the pathway, and we have family reunion allied with all of that. So the kid gets the degree and the rest of the family comes.
Chain migration.
Chain migration. But also, what are we doing to the quality of the education in Australia? Because I hardly hear of anyone anymore that fails university for not meeting the grade. Almost everyone passes. It might be the quality of your pass, that's the question. But whoever fails university anymore, and if everyone's going and everyone's passing, how good's a degree? Well,
we talk about the difference between an absent fail and an earned fail. It's okay to fail students if they just don't turn in work. That's an absent fail. But we come under a lot of pressure. Now, it's tacit pressure. I can't give you a memo, but there's a lot of pressure not to give out earned fails, meaning that if a student does the work, we are sort of expected to find a way to pass them.
So the integrity of the system, the integrity of the academic system is completely under siege.
Under threat. Let's reserve under siege for tomorrow, but we're getting there. We're getting there.
And then what extent is there an infiltration ideologically into the university as a result of some of these students being very pro-Beijing?
Oh, I think there's actually, ironically, very little. Most of our students, including our Chinese students, are very independent-minded. Now, if you're Chinese and you're pro-Beijing, that's as natural as me being American and being pro-Washington, right? There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. What's wrong is that we depend on these pro-Beijing students. It's not wrong for them to be pro-Beijing. It's wrong that if they have a complaint or if they were to leave the country, our whole system could collapse. That's the problem. It's our problem. It's not the students' problem.
But what is the answer to this? I mean, this takes to another issue altogether, doesn't it, where schools, I mean, we're job snobs and everything. At schools, in careers advice, we say, oh, go to university, when there are tremendous jobs in plumbing and skills and trade and everything at TAFE, and we're filling our universities up, we're reducing the standard. I mean, Julia Gillard said we'll drop the standard, let everyone in because there's a capitation fee. Taxpayers' money comes in according to the number of students who are enrolled in university, and the circle goes on and on and on. But we're diluting standards.
Absolutely, but I would be telling my students, do a university degree and then learn a trade. There's nothing wrong with being a university-educated plumber. So I would love to see more of that, but of course we tell our students to somehow be above that. We tell them that, it's somehow not using your degree if you take on a trade. Now, I think that's really the problem. I would love to see more of our students do an arts degree and then enter a trade.
Well, you say in the paper here you're concerned about what might happen if things go wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah, what could go wrong?
What could go wrong is with the trade war between China and the United States, the yuan could collapse. China could suspend convertibility of the yuan if its economy goes bad. And if that happens, we could see a multi-$100 million hit to Australian university revenues. And it could happen overnight. It could happen for 2020.
And that's also, can I just jump in there, that also impacts very heavily the Commonwealth budget because of our reliance in crazy terms with foreign students.
Well, now, before the professor goes, he's written this book, which is magnificent, The New Authoritarianism, Trump, Populism and the Tyranny of Experts. In recommending the book, I note that Adrian Pabst, the co-author of The Politics of Virtue, says this of the professor's book: Babones' critique of the liberal expert class, think about this, brilliantly exposes their contempt for ordinary people. A crucial contribution to our understanding of how contemporary liberalism is increasingly illiberal and undemocratic. There's a bit of a culture war on, isn't there?
Well, the new authoritarians are not Donald Trump or Alan Jones. The new authoritarians are the expert class, the liberals who insist that they know what's best for you and they can run the country better than the democracy can.
The left, we mean.
Well, you can call it left, you can call it right, but either way, it's the experts who think they should decide, not the people.
Good on you. Great to talk to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
There he is, Professor Salvatore Babones, and the book is simply called, wonderful read, The New Authoritarianism.